Hello, my name is Ayan, and today we are talking about the Russian accent.
Hello, I am Trip from Serbia.
Okay.
I fucked that up.
No, that was good.
That's good, that's good.
I thought that was pretty good. That's pretty good. Всем привет, меня зовут Айн, и, как всегда, если вы тут впервые на канале, то добро пожаловать на канал. Я американский полиглот, который выучил русский язык и теперь снимает видео на русском языке на различные темы, связанные с Америкой, с языками, с культурой и так далее. И сегодня мы говорим о русском акценте. Я несколько месяцев назад сделал подобное видео, в котором я говорил о том, как звучит русский акцент в английском языке, но сегодня мы поговорим о том, нравится ли американцам русский акцент и отношение американцев к русскому акценту, как он воспринимается в нашем обществе и, в общем, насколько важно иметь хороший акцент, когда вы разговариваете на английском языке или когда вы находитесь в США. И для этого видео я пригласил своего американского друга Trip.
What's up?
Trip не знает ни одного слова на русском, и поэтому через несколько секунд мы перейдем на английский, и, конечно, тут будут субтитры, чтобы вы все понимали. Итак, у меня тут на телефоне есть несколько вопросов, касающихся русского акцента, которые мы вместе обсудим, и я думаю, что вам будет очень интересно. Итак, без лишних слов, давайте начнем. Let's begin.
Let's get it.
Хорошо, ребята, теперь с этого момента мы будем говорить только на английском. Но вы должны все понимать, потому что тут будут субтитры. Ну, тут должно быть субтитры. Alright, so, to get us started, the first question that I want to discuss is, what do you think of when you think of the Russian accent?
Oh gosh, when I think of a Russian accent, I think of kind of like strong, but also like can come off like a bit aggressive. Not gonna lie. Like hearing somebody like if somebody was like yelling at me in Russian, I would be scared for my life. Not gonna lie. I would be ready to run for the hills. But also like again, it just a lot stronger accent, I would say.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that just because I think Russian as a language and as a people are typically considered very masculine. They're perceived to be very masculine, and the Russian accent is just like that. Just like the language when people speak with a Russian accent, because accents imitate the sounds of someone's native language, it sounds aggressive. Like when Russian people speak in English with a Russian accent, that is, not all Russian people have a strong accent. It sounds like a bear. It sounds scary. It sounds like you're being threatened.
Bro, I literally was gonna say, like, you have to be able to like yell at a bear to scare it off. Like, you use a Russian accent. You know that was from years of practice.
Yeah.
You wouldn't like say it in Spanish or anything, like seduce the bear.
In terms of typical depictions of Russian accents that I think of when I think of a Russian accent, besides the everyday people that we have in the U.S. here of Russian descent that have Russian accents, I think of Arnold Schwarzenegger in like, what's that one movie where it's where he goes to Moscow, like they filmed like part of it in Moscow. He's playing like a Soviet like officer. I can't remember the name, but there's a movie like that. And I also think of Rocky, where he's like getting ready for the big fight against the Soviet dude.
Ivan Drago.
Yeah, Ivan Drago. Yeah, exactly. So, and they all have that Russian accent.
And they're very thick and stern, strong.
Exactly, like no emotions, very masculine. They look down and they go, "I'm going to destroy you."
Yeah, like, I will kill you. Yeah.
So the next question is, how do you think the Russian accent is perceived here in the United States? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? How do you think people react to it?
I think there is an initial level of like, it is a little bit more negative, I would say, just in general. But I think again, it's one of those things where that natural fear of that strong, like we talked about before, it's like that strong accent that it can honestly scare people. I don't think it's inherently negative at all, though. I definitely think in general it's a nice accent, but like again, historically and all that sort of stuff, I think it is, especially like movies, Hollywood, all that sort of stuff, it's very negatively associated in the US, like as the villain and all this other stuff. So I would say
I think they portray a lot of villains, or they at least portrayed a lot of villains in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s as being Russians, because the Soviet Union was our natural enemy.
Yeah.
And so we made all of our bad guys in movies Russians, and they all speak with a Russian accent, and so it has a negative, almost sinister connotation to it. Mm-hmm. But I will say that's specifically for men, in a weird twist, I think a lot of people think Russian women with Russian accents can be considered very sexy. Maybe that's also because Russian women here are considered, like, in general, very, very beautiful.
Yeah.
And so the accent kind of complements that. It's kind of hard. It's kind of like when you see a beautiful person, the accent's only going to add to it rather than detract from it.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And yeah, again, like could be also like a polar thing, right? Where like guys just like get super masculine and women it's just like very attractive in the same sense, you know?
Yeah. So yeah, overall, I'd say it's negative, but I don't think that it translates into people treating someone worse because of it.
No.
It can maybe cause fear in some people, like, oh, this is a little bit foreign, I'm not used to it, especially based on the context.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's like, oh, you're dumb because you have an accent.
No, definitely not dumb. I would say again, more like hesitation slash I don't know what the right word I'm looking for is, but you know, like that like initial hesitation. Hesitation, but again, it's all psychological based on what we consume in media.
Yeah,
right.
That's true. Here in the United States, we have lots of people with different accents, and none of them really makes anyone think any type of bad way. It's something that we're used to.
Yeah.
And it just so happens there's a lot of Eastern European and Russian, like people that work in IT and finance, etc. And so a lot of those people are in upper level positions. And so having an accent like that's usually going to be associated with, I guess, like a higher class. Like people don't encounter it and go, oh, that's ghetto, you know?
No, definitely not anything like that. Yeah. Again, to be here, I would say, and like to be successful or anything like that, it's, you have to have a certain level of success. Like,
exactly. And I think that's kind of what happens. The Russians that come here are successful and they have that accent, and so people are like, okay, these people are better to do. It might be scary, but they're better to do. Yeah. So now the next question, kind of associated to the last question.
Okay.
Do you personally like the Russian accent?
So again, bringing up the last question, I really don't have any like strong feelings towards it, right? Again, the initial like thought is like that's like a more aggressive, like strong, all that sort of stuff when it comes from another male. So it could be slightly intimidating depending on who's saying things at me, right? Like they're like big, jacked, and they're like
he's built like a bear.
Built like a bear. It might be a little intimidating, but again, coming from a woman, like again, very attractive. So it's more of a net neutral. So
okay, I think that's fair. I think in my case, when I hear a Russian accent, it triggers interest because I'm like, oh, this person probably speaks Russian, and I like to practice my Russian. I mean, it's not a language you encounter here very often, and I like to speak it. So I'm like, oh, is this person possibly Russian? It's a good game I play. Yeah. But in terms of the accent itself, I think it sounds very masculine, like you said. And I grew up playing a lot of Battlefield, Call of Duty type stuff where people are always speaking with a Russian accent. So I associated with that. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. Yeah. And when I would say that personally, I think Russian women, can be very beautiful. And when they have that accent, it kind of adds to it. Yeah. Whereas if like it's more of like a built like scary looking Russian woman, it's like the same with a guy. It's like, oh, she's a bear.
Yeah, I could see. The decipher for that. It just adds to the mystique, you know.
Yeah, the mystique. Yeah. So I would say for me, it's a net positive, but mainly because I have a closer connection to Russian speakers than I'd say most Americans do.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. Next question is, what accent does the Russian accent resemble the most?
Oh gosh.
I can start by answering this. In my opinion, I think certain German accents, like a Bavarian accent, like what Arnold Schwarzenegger speaks when he's not pretending to be a Russian officer, I think that sounds very similar to a Russian accent in English. It's kind of like, get to the chopper, it's
very like back
very,
of the throat.
Very guttural, very strong. Yeah, and I can't think of anything else. Like, it's definitely not like an Indian accent. Like, oh, hello, very nice. It's none of that. It's none of that.
Not the handshake. I don't know why I think like Middle Eastern or something like that, or just like that area in general, but I can't think of anything other than maybe like a German or just again Eastern European, but that makes sense why they're so similar, right?
Because they all speak Slavic languages, they have that set of sounds that produces that accent to begin with. So I guess all of this now boils down to the question, how important is having a good accent in another language? And in the context of speaking with a Russian accent in America, do you think that having a Russian accent in America is going to affect how you interact with others or how you get a job?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think when learning another language, I do think it's really important to try and pick up like the nuances of that particular accent. So for instance, I've practiced a little German, practiced a little Spanish. When I was practicing my German, Like with native speakers, they always comment like, "Oh, your accent's like pretty good." This, that, the third, and I think that goes a long ways, and also just helping that person understand you better as well when you're speaking that language. Because if you're enunciating, you're hitting all like the right like vocal cues, then I think it goes a long way with understanding, right? Even speaking English, like we were in Scotland, like talking with people from like the UK in English, you may not understand them because of their accent, right?
That's true.
So I think it's very important in that sense. In terms of getting a job, again, I think same thing. Just in terms of getting a job, you want to be understood. You want to be able to come off clear, concise, and get your point across as easy as possible. And I think that's one place where an accent can hinder you at times. Luckily, I don't think I've ever had a real problem with anybody with like a Russian accent, though, for instance, talking in English, because it is already pretty concise, I would say, when they talk in English.
They enunciate a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say that socially, it's not much of a hindrance because, again, America's super diverse. Accents are a common everyday thing. A lot of people here that grew up here will have parents that have accents and they're used to it. But I will say that people always appreciate having a nicer accent, but as long as it's not a hindrance, like when we were in Scotland and we're talking to people, they're like, "What'd you say?" You know, as long as it's not confusing, I don't think it's a social hindrance. No one's gonna think of you any which way. If anything, it attracts people to you because they're curious about you. I will say that in a work environment here in the US, people associate accent with level of education. Even if someone's English is good, but they have a strong accent, not a light accent, I'm saying a strong, like real Russian accent like that, people will think that they're maybe not as educated, maybe didn't learn the language as well, and people may think twice before hiring somebody with that accent versus an American who doesn't have an accent.
Yeah, I could definitely see that again, especially again how you come off, like, and if you can always be understood. Is I think the big concern there.
If you're like a beautiful Russian man or a beautiful Russian woman that comes here, then it's like, oh, he's got a sexy accent, like actually, right?
No.
I feel like people with accents have a leg up.
I don't know, man. If you want to find you a Russian man with a sexy accent, we can do that.
Find a real man. I will say the Russian accent is probably a lot better in terms of how it sounds and the stereotypes behind it compared to other accents. Like, there are a lot of accents that sound a lot funnier and have a worse reputation. So Russian accent's pretty net neutral in that regard.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would really make fun of one. I would be too scared to, not gonna lie.
Итак, ребята, это было все. Я надеюсь, что эти обсуждения для вас были довольно интересными, и я надеюсь, что вы хоть что-то новое узнали. И, как всегда, если вы хотите, чтобы мы делали больше таких видео в будущем, и если вы хотите, чтобы Трип бывал у меня почаще на канале, то, как всегда, поставьте лайк, подписывайтесь на канал, поделитесь видео, это мне помогает, это показывает алгоритм Ютуба, что канал у меня крутой, типа того. И если вы хотите связаться с нами в социальных сетях, то ссылки на наши страницы ВКонтакте, в ТикТоке, в Инстаграме, во всех этих социальных сетях будут в описании под этим видео. И обязательно напишите ему в Инстаграме, потому что он любит с вами общаться. И как всегда, поделитесь вашими впечатлениями в комментариях, потому что я очень интересуюсь вашими мнениями, я очень хочу знать, что вы думаете об этой теме. Итак, как всегда, всем спасибо за просмотр, и мы увидимся в следующем выпуске. Всем спасибо и всем пока. Удачи!